We've got a bold audience, so bold that we have entered version 6 of your boldest predictions about the 2022 college football season. This has been a runaway success in terms of what we really care about, which is viewership. All due respect to the sentiment of this show, viewership has been off the charts for this segment. And so we're going to do another one tonight. Listen to these because we have some doozies. First up, this is Joe. He says Miami's going to win the ACC Coastal. Are they now? Now, a lot of you have either a love or a hate relationship with Miami. I think some of the B-roll we have of Mario just casually walking through a parking lot with the team is great. Do you understand what Joe's saying here? Like, this to me is a 5 on the boldness scale. This is not all that bold at all. Miami's in the ACC Coastal. Joe is predicting them to win the ACC Coastal because a lot of you don't like Miami, or you think, first-year head coach can't really win anything. You just automatically say, they're not going to win the Coastal. Well, how winnable is the Coastal? It's so winnable that the head coach last year, Manny Diaz, got fired, and they still finished second in the division. That's how soft it was. So Pitt made a run last year. Congratulations to the Panthers, and they went and won not only the division, but they won the conference too. Pitt, famously at this point, is replacing a first-round quarterback. North Carolina woefully underachieved relative to expectation last year. And I'm just running down the list of what the competition is. Both the schools in Virginia and Virginia Tech have first-year staffs and suspect rosters, and we'll get into that a little bit more this summer. Who else are we talking about here? Georgia Tech? Georgia Tech's not going to challenge in the division. Duke is not going to challenge in the division. Well, that's it. That's the entire division. So I'll tell you another thing. The two probably prime contenders here, as you're looking on YouTube at the win totals right now, Pitt, 9 wins. Miami, 8.5 wins. North Carolina, 8 wins. Pitt and North Carolina, you would figure, sitting here in May, are the prime contenders, along with Miami. Miami plays both of them at home. That's the plus side on the schedule front. The downside on the schedule front is, out of those 3 teams, only Miami has to play Clemson this year. So it's at the very end of the season, second to last week of the season. In fact, they go to Clemson, and then they play Pitt. At least they don't have to go to Pitt. Weather-related plus there. But this is a 5. And I'll tell you what, if that little Clemson anecdote wasn't a part of the scheduling makeup here, it would be lower than that. You could probably call Miami the slight favorite to win the division. That's probably how much that game at Clemson matters. Next up, this one is very near and dear to me, and so I got to be careful. I got to take a deep breath as I read this next one because it has to do with a loved one of mine. His name is Will Anderson. Felix Sharp says Will Anderson going to win the Heisman Trophy. Now, I want you to understand, it's never been more important for me to state that my personal feelings on Will Anderson are going to be set to the side here. This is a 7 on the boldness scale. Certainly not because he won't deserve it. I think I've given that qualifier on like every Will Anderson segment that we've done this year. If I ran this vote and Felix said Will Anderson's going to win the Heisman this year, that would be like a 2 or 3 on the boldness scale. Because barring injury, he's going to be in New York because he's the best player in college football. He may very well have been last year. So that's if. But that's not what the state of this award is right now. The 2021 Heisman finalist list was an embarrassment to the award, and it was an embarrassment as a result to college football. The right guy won. Bryce Young won. You had a guy, listen to this, by the way, just to tee this up the right way. Will Anderson led FBS in tackles for loss last year. He had 31. The next closest guy had 18.5. That's Will Anderson over a dozen ahead of the next best in the sport. He had a tackle for loss per game rate of 2.5. The next closest was 1.6. He had almost a full tackle for loss more per game than whoever else college football threw up in your face. Sacks, 17.5, most in the country. The second most was 13.5. That was Aiden Hutchinson, who went to New York. Did he finish second? He was pretty high up there. So you've got some things working against you here. Bryce Young is on his team. The Bama fatigue is going to be real this year. You know, if an Alabama player were to win this year, if Will Anderson were to win the Heisman this year, that would be a three-peat in Heismans for Alabama at 3 different positions. Devontae Smith, Bryce Young, and then Will Anderson, which I don't need to tell you would be unprecedented. Dallas Turner is on his team, which is a great thing for Alabama. But if you're just a stat head, which, like every Heisman voter is when it comes to defensive players, that's probably going to take a little bit of juice away from his resume. But the most important bullet point I wrote down that will keep Will Anderson from winning the Heisman is ignorance. The same thing that kept him out of New York City last year. So that's a 7 on the boldness scale. Next up is, I think, the boldest rating I have given a prediction so far. We've gone with a 9, but I'm giving this one a 9.5. Weston Wagoner, or Wagoner, said Kentucky will upset Georgia at home, go 11-1 regular season, their only loss will be to Tennessee at Neyland, and make it to the SEC championship game in Atlanta. So, I gave this a 9.5. This is very hard for me to see happening. The first thing I need to do is I do need to acknowledge, if this ever does happen, certainly it would be in the year where Georgia loses a bunch of talent and they're coming off a title year, so they could have some complacency issues. You combine that with the fact that Stoops is the only guy to pull off the double-digit win seasons up there in football anyway, and he may very well have a first-round caliber quarterback in Will Levis playing for him this year. So I will acknowledge, if this ever were to happen, it would be this year, and if it were to happen, it would sound crazy in May. So that's where we are right now. So here's the closest thing to wood we have on the set. Let's knock on it for our Kentucky brethren, one of whom was in here earlier trying to sell me on this. That's what brought it down from 10 to 9.5. The win total for Kentucky this year is 8.5. I don't know that people who don't bet win totals understand how high a number that is for Kentucky football. 8.5 over-under win total for Kentucky is a monumental endorsement of what Stoops has done with that program up there. Having said that, now you don't have individual game point spreads out there. We've got our own internal numbers. Suffice it to say, they will either be an underdog or a short favorite in at least 4 games. Those games, as mentioned in the tweet, at Tennessee, but they also have a game at Florida. They go to Ole Miss, and they've got Georgia at home. So you got to go to 3 of 4 on those, and then not lose any other games. They have to be undefeated. To do this, they have to be undefeated going into the Georgia game, I think. Actually, so they could lose at Tennessee. But the thing about it is, if they beat Georgia, that is November 19th. I want you to understand what that would mean. So if they lose to Tennessee October 29th, they got plenty of time. They got 4 games, a whole month to build back up some steam, and they would still control their own destiny because they would still have Georgia in front of them, even if Georgia's undefeated. If they beat Georgia on November 19th, in Athens no less, this is not an early season upset. Everybody is zoned in by that point. If Kentucky were to beat Georgia in Athens that late in the year, it would be one of the bigger upsets, not knowing what the point spread would be, of course, but just in terms of theatrics, like in terms of the overall perception of what football is in the SEC versus what it would be that afternoon, that would be a monumental upset. It would be a landmark upset for the Kentucky program. And also, forget about just the SEC race. Kentucky would be right there in the college football playoff picture. So I know that sounds foreign to you because it hasn't happened. That's a 9.5 for me. But boy, would it be entertaining to watch. You're looking right now at the odds to win the SEC championship this year. Kentucky is 2, 4, 6. They are 7th. Right there, well, actually, they're like a 3-way tie for 5th, I guess, with LSU, Auburn, and then Kentucky is at plus 4,000. 8.5 over-under win total. Good for Kentucky before the season even starts. Next up, now this one's a little more doable, but it's still pretty bold. Ohio State, undefeated national champion, so 15-0. Now, Ohio State's going to be favored in every game they play. This is not out of the realm of possibility. It never is. They are one of a handful of teams, a small handful of teams every given year that this is always on the table for. Having said that, I gave this a 7 on the boldness scale. Number one, because it is just hard to win all of your games for pretty much anyone. Number two, it is still the Big Ten. While a lot of you scoff at that, it means something. It's the second toughest conference in America. And therefore, they do have games at Michigan State. They have a 2-game stretch of Iowa and then at Penn State. Of course, they've got Michigan at the end of the year. Now, to me, if I look at their schedule, it's hard for me to look at it and say that I would rearrange it any other way. They got Notre Dame to open, so it's a really good, solid opponent, but they'll be favored by double digits. It's at home. They should win that game. I don't think anyone's arguing with that. They got Wisconsin 3 weeks later at home. They go to Michigan State, but they've got Rutgers before that. They go to Iowa, but they got a bye week. Well, they got Iowa at home and a bye week before Iowa at home. And then they go at Penn State, at Northwestern, back-to-back games. There is no landmine sequence of games here, is my point. I do have a lot of friends in the Northeast that would tell me, look at that game on November 19th, very quietly. They go to Maryland right before they play Michigan. I see it. We had a prediction last week that Taulia Tagovailoa was going to be in New York City for a Heisman Trophy finalist spot. So the schedule is very favorable. Ohio State's one of a handful of teams that could pull this off. This is not crazy to me. It is an indictment. Well, it's a positive reflection of the program, I guess, is the better term, that I say it's only a 7 on the boldness scale when you predict an undefeated season. Their last 5 recruiting cycles, like they're right up there. We all know what the roster's made of. They got one of the best quarterbacks in the country, one of the best wide receiver stables in the country, incredible running back depth, overhauling the defense, which is, of course, most people in Columbus's #1 priority of things to watch when they finally do tee it up. But that's a 7. Now I've got one that's a little bit bolder to wrap it up here. Well, it's not mine, it's yours. This is John Williams. He says West Virginia will make the Big 12 title game. That's an 8 on the boldness scale. Now, the Big 12 could be very, very wide open this year. I've got a problem with West Virginia being in the Big 12, which is its own side segment, because their closest road trip is 1,000 miles away. Every road trip is a long road trip. There are no bus trips for West Virginia. There are too many unknowns on the team right now for me to make this any less than an 8 on the boldness scale. There are not divisions in this conference, so just the top 2 teams make it to the conference title game. JT Daniels, for those who have been kind of tuned out, you may not know JT Daniels, former Georgia quarterback, transferred to West Virginia. Presumably he will be the starter there, but he came in after spring. They had kind of a muddy quarterback situation coming out of spring. So it's not like, it's not like some other places. Like at Ole Miss, for example, it's Luke Altmaier, it's Jackson Dart, and we don't really know who the starter is going to be there yet. It's not like that, at least perceptionally, at West Virginia. It's pretty widely assumed JT Daniels will be the starting quarterback there, but he is an unknown in and of himself at this point. I don't think that's unfair to say, and I also think it's very fair to say the attrition they had in their secondary at West Virginia, no matter what they have done or do in the portal to this point, it's going to be a question mark, especially in this conference. And lastly, if you'll look at their November schedule, they wrap the regular season consecutively with a game at Iowa State, home versus Oklahoma, Kansas State at home, sleeper in the Big 12, and then at Oklahoma State. Those are their last 4 games. And if you want to go 2 games prior to that, they got 3 games prior to that, 4 games prior to that. Why not? They got Texas, Baylor, Texas Tech, TCU. It's tough. It's tough. You've got to assume that you're going to have 2 losses max if you're going to the conference title game. I am assuming that. Crazier things have happened. That's a tough 10-2 slate there. Very tough. Doable, but tough. So I'm going to give that one an 8. Bold predictions have been one of the funnest things that I think we've ever done in the spring on this show. And Director Colin can attest to that.